Hi friends, this video is about solid intumescent cataracts that tend to occur in younger individuals who do not have a senile, immature or almost mature type of cataract with intumescence, because in the latter there's a lot of liquefied cortex, whereas in the former, as in this young person who was 45-year-old and who was a diabetic, there is a swelling of the cortical fibers and the lens epithelial cells have not liquefied yet. Now this is the most difficult type of intumescent cataract to manage, and let's see how I handled it or what really went wrong in this case. Anterior chamber is first filled with the trypan blue solution under air. When there is air in the anterior chamber and you try to make a keratome entry, the air bubble may tend to get inside the clear corneal incision. That's why you see the little girdle of bubbles that is formed. So try to make the air bubble not reach the corneal entry site if you want to avoid this complication. We use a combination of methyl cellulose and a high molecular weight combo viscoelastic like Viscode injected under it. I'm carefully trying to perform the small initial Rhexis because I'm planning to do a double Rhexis technique in this patient. Taking all the due precaution, I create a small opening in the anterior capsule. There is a little tag there, and this has to be rounded off, otherwise this will easily extend to the periphery. So using the Utrada forceps, I round off the small Rhexis to a 2 mm Rhexis. Now we have to decompress the lens. What you see there is not an extension of the Rhexis but a wash off of the trypan blue that kind of simulates as though the Rhexis ran away at that point. So the Rhexis is quite intact and I'm trying to decompress this solid intumescent cataract. The cortex is solidified and it is swollen and I'm not able to get much of the cortex out in spite of trying. This is unlike the senile variants of intumescent cataracts where there's a lot of liquefied cortex and it's quite easy to decompress the lens. I make a nick in the anterior capsule to create a larger Rhexis, and before I can put in viscoelastic, this nick just extends to the periphery because the solidified and swollen up portions of the lens are still showing a considerable amount of intumescence. I proceed by making a small nick in the anterior capsule and very carefully trying to create a larger size capsular Rhexis. In this type of intumescent cataract, there's always an inherent danger that the Rhexis will run off to the periphery even if you have tried to decompress it, and therefore you need to use a centripetal pull and very carefully complete the Rhexis. Now there is a Rhexis runoff point at 7 o'clock position, but remember that the Rhexis that runs to the equator does not easily pass on to the posterior capsule, because the equatorial capsule of the human crystalline lens is actually a type of girdle and it kind of resists the transmission of tears in the anterior capsule to the posterior capsule unless a lot of force is exerted by the surgeon, either mechanically or hydrostatically, in order to push this Rhexis tear onto the posterior capsule. Also, this cataract is quite soft and there is no great danger that I'm going to give too much of tractional force onto the tone edge of the capsule. The soft cataract was actually cheese wiring, and therefore I immediately reduced my settings. I reduced the power. It was initially 30, I reduced it to 20, and the vacuum I reduced from 350 to 250 millimeters of mercury. The bottle height is also reduced from the 100 centimeters above the eye level to about 80 centimeters in order to reduce the intraocular pressure within the anterior chamber. The nucleus management is quite easily completed, and because most of it was done in the supracapsular space and because the lens was actually soft, there is no elevated risk that this tear will extend to the posterior capsule. It's actually quite dicey when you're removing the cortex. The cortex is fluffy, they're not sticky, and therefore you just can't peel it off as easily as you would in a case of immature senile cataracts. This particular patient, being young, chose EDOF lens, and this is a Rayner EMV lens. I have no financial interest in this product, but I think it's probably one of the most easy to handle preloaded lenses in this group, because you just have to inject viscoelastic to that tiny port and you're done. The EDOF lens is gently injected then into the anterior chamber and then dial it into the capsular bag. I can see a good overlap of the entire optic and haptic of the IOL by the anterior capsule. Thank you for your attention.